Um, That'll be my first note then. So everyone knows this is going to be recorded and available on the SFA website after today. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see so many people from the search community gathered in one place. The Search Fund Alliance is very excited to host this webinar today on the important topic of CEO coaches. For those of you who are new to the Search Fund Alliance, it is designed to help the community collaborate, to share best practices amongst investors, and to improve outcomes for everyone. We're very excited to roll out our new website. Please check it out. I've put it in the chat. You can follow the link. Okay, getting into the format for today. We've got 3 great panelists on. I'm mostly going to turn it over to them. They're going to go through a case study and share their various perspectives of using a search fund CEO coach. We'll have plenty of time for audience questions at the end. If you want to place those in the chat as we go through the webinar, I'll start to address them to the panelists. And finally, I wanted to mention that we have at the SFA assembled a list of known CEO coaches who know and work with the search fund community, and that'll also be posted on our website after the webinar. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex Stavros, the CEO of Embark Health. He is going to kick us off on talking it through his experience using a CEO coach.
Great. No, ma allora ne ho parlato con il nostro consulente del lavoro. Sostanzialmente lei può cominciare a lavorare.
All right. One more time. Off to Alex.
Thanks, Lacey. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for making the time. It's great to be here. This is a great session I'm excited about. I'm very passionate about this topic of coaching. Growth is our company's 4th core value. For us, having a growth mindset means that we can always do and be better. We can always grow, we can improve. Every interaction, every skill, every result can always be better. And coaching is a big part of being better than yesterday. I want to give some background first to set the stage. First off, the people on the panel with me with this case study are Hal Mote and Jeff Silverman. First off, Hal Mote, he's a long-time investor of mine since 2011 when we first closed the search company. Hal was on the board for the first 6 years of the company. He's a great friend, a great mentor, a fantastic investor, an excellent board member, and continues to be that great mentor to me as well today. Jeff Silverman became my executive coach in 2011, which was pre-close, and he is still my coach today. We're now going on 11 years together, and since then he has coached many other leaders from our organization. So suffice to say, Jeff Silverman has been a fantastic partner to me over the last 11 years. He's also a great friend and has had a big impact on our company's leadership frameworks and on my personal leadership presence and impact. Just as an aside, Hal, because of how good the experience was, Hal later actually hired Jeff Silverman as well as a coach for a company he was the CEO of a number of years ago. Suffice to say that both Hal and Jeff are a meaningful reason why Embark is a great company today. And to the extent I am a good leader, it is also in large part thanks to them. Also, in terms of background, to set the stage, I graduated from Stanford Business School in 2011 and did a search fund right out of the gates. I chose Stanford for a few reasons, but one of the main ones was because of the strength the program had around what I would call soft skills. That means leadership training. Sorry, I dropped something. That means leadership training and management skills, interpersonal skills. And when I went to business school, that's what I focused on. There's the hard skills of business, finance and accounting and marketing. I went to business school because I wanted to invest more in my soft skills. So chose Stanford. And at that point in time, Stanford also had launched a new curriculum, which is in place now and has been for the past decade plus. That new curriculum had a whole bench of coaches that they had hired. And these coaches were engaged in a variety of classes. So almost every soft skill class that Stanford offered also had coaching available. And so I took advantage of that coaching. And that was one of my first interactions with coaching. I had understood the importance of coaching, obviously in sports growing up, but also from a leadership perspective, knew a lot of, if not most, all CEOs of large publicly traded companies have executive coaches. So fast forward to purchasing the company. Before the close of the company, we obviously formed the board. Hal Mote was one of the board members, and I wanted to hire a coach, and I knew that was going to cost some money, and I wanted to introduce that to the board to see what feedback they had and if they'd be willing to support it. And when I presented it to them, I basically talked about it as if I wanted a coach for the rest of my life, in terms of this idea of having a growth mindset that I can always do and be better, and having a coach will hopefully make me a better CEO. And I saw the value, and I understood that the job of a CEO can be lonely. I also understood that I was inexperienced. I was young, as Hal and Jeff can attest. I was probably really rough around the edges, and maybe, how can I say it? I was just incompetent. And so I wanted to get all the help I could get moving in to becoming the CEO of this company, something I had never done before, and all the support I could get. And I felt that since I wasn't going to have a direct supervisor or manager to coach and mentor me and develop me, that hiring a coach could provide that. So I asked the recently formed board prior to close what they thought and how they felt. And across the board, everybody was supportive. I would say some more so than others, probably 50-50. I would say half of them really didn't care. And they said, if you want to do it, that's fine. We don't really think it's needed. And then a couple of them, including Hal, really felt compelled by it. And it actually sent them a positive message about my willingness to be coached and to learn and to want to grow. So they were very supportive. In that process, I asked them if any of them had recommendations. One of them did have a recommendation. Kent Weaver was on the board back then. He still is actually today on my board. And he had worked with Jeff Silverman in the past. They had actually worked together at PepsiCo many, many years ago. And that's how they knew each other. And Jeff had recently changed his career to become an executive coach. And so Kent recommended him. I also called a couple of the coaches from Stanford. I ended up choosing Jeff and engaged him before we closed the business. That was important to me. So I did, as we were finalizing due diligence in the deal, I was interviewing a lot of coaches because I wanted the coach to be involved with the creation of the 100-day plan and to make sure that I could hit the ground running. I knew that those first few days and weeks were going to be pretty impactful in terms of medium and long-term value creation and the growth of the organization. One of the reasons I chose Jeff actually is because he knew Kent, one of our board members. I wanted to be transparent. I wanted to be open. And if they knew each other, I felt like that they could actually talk and we would all understand where we're coming from. And I really felt like I had a board and Jeff, that they were there really to rally around me and support me to become the best CEO I could become, and knew that that would create a win-win outcome. So this is back in 2011. We closed the deal. It was a pretty fast search process. Graduated in June of 2011. We closed the deal on October 31st of 2011. I hired Jeff Silverman in October of 2011. And for context, at the time, the company was 50 employees back then, one state. Today, we are 1,300 employees, and we have facilities in 16 states. The time of the acquisition, it was a residential treatment center for teens struggling with issues of attachment, trauma, and adoption, which obviously is a unique business, very service intensive, very people intensive. I didn't know hardly anything about mental health or treatment centers or working with teens that had severe behavioral, emotional, and mental health issues. I moved to the middle of Missouri to Lake of the Ozarks. I had a newborn daughter, Leah, my wife. We moved out there, and there were 4 founders of the treatment center. All 4 of them were going to stay on, and I thought it was important, given my lack of experience and knowledge being a CEO, and and also of the industry and the business. I wanted them to stay on. And so I felt like I had a lot of unique challenges. Again, I wanted to get as much help and assistance as I could. So we engaged Jeff. Jeff, one of the first things he did was fly out to Missouri, and we got to meet in person. This was shortly after the acquisition. I can't remember exactly if it was probably a matter of weeks. And in that process early on with Jeff, the first thing that Jeff facilitated was what I call kind of like a lifeline or an opportunity for us to learn more about our personal backgrounds, what each of us, what motivates us, our values, where we came from, how we got here, a way to connect and set the framework. And then the other thing that was really impactful early on was that Jeff did a 360 almost right off the bat. And that meant that he would get feedback from each of my direct reports. And along with that 360, there's a roundtable. So he would collect feedback one-on-one in written form and then do a roundtable. So bring all of my direct reports in and discuss me. Along with that as well is Jeff introduced what we still do today. And there are a number of leadership and management frameworks that Jeff has introduced to our organization. One of them is the assimilation process of a new leader. And so Jeff was able to help the founder actually facilitate an assimilation, which was a great way to build a relationship. And that was just a process of the direct reports wanting to have questions for me that maybe they didn't feel comfortable asking me in person. And so they all brainstormed the questions together without me in the room. And then I came into the room and then they had the questions and I answered them. And that created a lot of vulnerability and trust and relationship because they asked questions and I answered questions that maybe they thought I wouldn't have. And that was Jeff's recommendation. And other thing Jeff did is along with the roundtable and the 360 is also some 2 to 3 level down roundtables. So there were about 50 employees at the time. And so I had my direct reports and underneath them was a manager and underneath them another manager. And so we brought a few more people because the impact of a leader in a small business, large businesses too, doesn't just go through your direct report because things can be missed in translation. And so perception was critical. I really learned early on that perception can be reality for people and that I need to own the perceptions others have of me. And that it is really valuable for me to know how people perceive me and realizing that actually different people perceive me differently based on who they are, not based off who I am. And so more about the feedback I receive in 360s or these roundtables actually is a gift because it tells me about them to a certain extent more than it tells me about me, which makes me a more effective leader, more empathetic, more thoughtful, more strategic, of knowing what I do and how that can impact certain people and how they interpret certain actions or certain ways I communicate. So early on, Jeff and I partnered to do all that, and that gave me just an amazing foundation to engage that organization at that time. Whereas if I was on my own, I think I would have my ego and all my insecurities and all of those things. I would create in my own head what I thought the reality was. And I'd say probably my experience is almost 99% of the time that's wrong. And that unless we can look to others, and one of the things Jeff works through is what's called the Johari window. And it's this idea that we have things and issues that we're aware of, strengths or weaknesses that others aren't. Then we also have things, strengths and weaknesses that we're aware of that others are. And that's kind of the open arena. And then we have strengths, particularly weaknesses that we're aware of that others aren't. And then we have the strengths and weaknesses that others are aware of that we aren't. And so engaging the people around us, direct reports and board members, and collecting information feedback actually helps us as leaders become more whole and more self-aware. The more self-aware we are, the bigger impact we can make. Obviously, that helps us grow and develop our emotional intelligence. From there, Jeff has worked with us for, like I mentioned, 11 years. He's worked with a number of our leaders. He's done a number of different projects, including he's the original founder, ended up departing the company a few years later. He did some, we suggested and paid for some coaching as the founder transitioned. We've actually done that on two occasions. Many of what we would call our lieutenants have hired Jeff as an executive coach. He's visited a number of our programs, done a number of 360s and roundtables, including he's done deep dives with our board of directors in terms of strengths and SWOTs and weaknesses of the business, of me as a leader. And then a lot of leadership management coaching frameworks. We have a really robust one-on-one framework where we require all of our managers to do one-on-ones in a very specific way with a template that was developed in conjunction with Jeff. Situational management training, the importance of two-level down one-on-ones and how to do those. And then also a lot of ad hoc coaching. And so early on in particular, when I was frustrated or had issues or I'm working on something, and I would call Jeff or we'd meet for our weekly one-on-one. One of the biggest frameworks he would help me with is this idea of head versus heart. And that often I would be approaching people through the lens of the head, problem solving, versus they were approaching the issue from the heart emotionally. And so I was speaking to their head when I should have been speaking to their heart, and their heart was speaking to my heart, but I was receiving it through my head. And so we were missing each other. And so Jeff would help me understand if it was a head or heart issue, and would also help me understand, take a step back and question, what am I trying to accomplish here? One of the biggest things was early on, there was some misalignment with the board around the importance of keeping the main founder. I felt like it was critically important to keep the founder engaged, not at all costs, but close to that. And that I had to bend backwards a lot of different ways and be very thoughtful, and knowing that he may not last, but we can't lose him early on. And I think that oftentimes in the search fund world, there are some perspectives that, hey, you want to get rid of the founder as soon as possible. I'm probably more in the camp of keep the founder as long as possible, and that the search CEO needs to check their ego at the door, and that the majority of the time, the issues with the founder has more to do with the young search CEO than it does with the founder. Now, there are many times when the founder is very unethical, not a good person. This particular founder wasn't necessarily unethical, but he was very difficult and was sabotaging things in very intentional ways. And I would have direct conversations with him about that. And I think that a good part of the board felt like when I would approach them that we should just terminate him immediately. I spent a lot more time evaluating that decision with Jeff. And I don't think that outcome could have been any more successful in terms of when and how the founder departed. And I definitely wouldn't and couldn't have done that without a coach being a mirror for me and to bounce those ideas off. So that was critical in terms of our experience with the coach. The other part that was critical is I think that search CEOs struggle with boards way more than investors and board members realize. And they often will go speak to other CEOs when they interact at conferences, and then search investors and board members will talk to each other about the struggles they have with the CEO. And I think that board and CEO relationship can be one of the biggest drivers of long-term value creation. So having that go well is really important. I was struggling. Now, one thing I would say that in business school, at least at the time at Stanford, when we talk about soft skills, there was training on everything under the sun except how to work with the board. And that was one of the most challenging things. And Jeff really helped me a lot with that. And that's where we started to do those 360 roundtables. And I started to understand more. I was the victim. I had become the victim of the board versus understand that I needed to take ownership of how the board goes. If the board meeting goes well, it's my fault. If it goes poorly, it's my fault. And that the board dynamics, if they're good, it's my fault. And then if they're bad, it's my fault. And when I started to take ownership of that versus expecting the board to just the amorphous idea of a board to perform better, things started to change. And Jeff really, and leadership coaches in general will almost always just put the mirror back on you. And I think from a growth mindset perspective, always making the issues about you is really powerful. So let me stop there because hopefully that provides some good meat, some good context. I think we'll have Hal and Jeff share a little bit about how they saw things in this first pre-close and then first year or two after close and since then.
Great, thank you, Alex. So from the perspective of a board member and an investor, the idea of leadership coach to me is tremendous. It's like going into your forest and cleaning out the underbrush to prevent a fire than fighting a fire later. And I'm going to reflect off a couple of things Alex said. You know, I think back to 2011 when Alex was making the acquisition, when the acquisition of Kalo was underway. And you know, Alex used the term incompetent. I would not use that term in exactly that way, because Alex possessed tremendous aptitude, right? Extremely intelligent, enthusiastic, imbued with a sense of mission, a desire, real, true, tremendous desire, like all of new CEOs have, is tremendous desire for success, right? You're in the game now, you're in the arena, you have your deal. But here's the thing that Alex did, and he exhibited this so well, even in today, using the word incompetent when really it's maybe lacking experience would be a better term. See, we as investors don't really know. We didn't really know what kind of a leader, what kind of a CEO Alex would develop into. And a coach is just that fire prevention step that helps improve the probability of success. You as new CEOs, as searchers and new CEOs, may believe that on your first day as a CEO, you're supposed to spring forth and be a fully formed CEO. None of us, I don't believe any of us who are realistic as investors or board members have that expectation. We give, just as we gave Alex the novice card, I'll call it the novice card. This is a card. Here, Alex, here's a card you can play. This is your card, your novice card. It happens to say University of Washington Forestry School on it. But here's your novice card that you can play when you have questions. Because, it's hard. It's hard to check your ego at the door, as Alex said, because you want success so bad, right? But here's what a coach does. The coach gives you that extra mentor-mentee relationship. They allow you to share your concerns, I'll just say it, insecurities, right? Hey, I remember when I was a CEO at age 31 and I did not have a leadership coach. And I went through some real struggles. I thought I was some hot stuff. Let me tell you, I'm a lot more calm than I was then, right? But yeah, anyway, but I didn't have a coach. And I almost, got fired about 3 years in, because it was the first time I'd ever stayed with a company long enough to have to live with my own mistakes. Anyway, and I didn't realize I could be the novice and I could ask more questions, I could get more help. Anyway, long story short, as an investor, I love it when the CEO says, okay, I'm a first-time CEO. I don't have the experience. I do have the aptitude. I'm smart. I'm hardworking. I'm confident. I know I can do this, but I need a little help. There's one more thing I want to reflect on, and this is from the perspective of a guy in his middle 60s who's been a CEO for over 30 years. I want to be a lifelong learner. When I saw Jeff working with Alex, and by the way, Alex passed me as a CEO about 18 months into his tenure. Okay, now I'm trying to learn from Alex. But long story short, I want to be a lifelong learner. If you're a CEO and you're not learning from the people who work for you, and if you're not serving the people that work for you effectively, and if you're not serving your customers, and if you're not serving, here's the thing, the CEO's role is the ultimate service role in my book, this is just I'm telling you my bias, but I think there's a lot of investors that believe this as well. The CEO has a lot of constituents that they have to keep happy. And a coach is the one constituent that offline, and it can be a mentor too, but they can be that role that is there offline and just helps. The last thing I want to mention is sometimes I've heard the objection that a coach is expensive, or that we don't have time for a coach. It's so, you're going so fast that first 100 days, 6 months, year, right? That's where a lot of things are happening right then, and you don't have time for a coach, or you feel it's expensive. I want to flip that over on everyone, investors, board members, and CEOs alike. I say you don't have time not to spend time on a coach. It's so valuable in terms of, look, if we do fire prevention now, an hour of fire prevention once a week might save you a major fire that burns down that business, burns down this could have been successful investment. And so, don't have time. No, this is one of the highest return investments you can make. So I'll turn it over to Jeff now for his perspective, and look forward to questions later.
Thanks, Hal. Thanks. I appreciate it. Thank you, Alex. I don't have a lot more to add because I think they really covered it, but I do, from my perspective, I was a relatively new coach working with Alex. So in many ways, we kind of learned this together. I had used a coach myself. I had been a prior CEO. Like Hal, I wish to gosh I had had a coach in my early years, because I felt like there was a need for me to prove myself, and I think my ego often got in the way of really seeking to understand. So I use this quote: "Seek to understand before seeking to be understood," and I think that really captures the idea of a coach. Is that the coach isn't going to be the person that tells you the answers. The coach is really going to play primarily 3 roles. They're going to be, a situational coach where they're going to listen, they're going to help facilitate, help you self-discover what you need to do. And that's probably the primary role. But the other 2 roles I think are really important, especially for a young CEO who maybe hasn't played the role before. The role of confidant is really important, because with your team, you can't confide in your team in that way, because there's things that could come back that you may confide in one person, not another. So you got to be really careful in what you share with the team in terms of your own personal struggles. And also with the board, while you want your board to have a confidant role with you, you also want to put your best foot forward. And there are going to be times where you're a little bit raw, and that's working with the coach. You can be raw, there's no judgment. And I think that's a key part of it. That again, as a CEO, I didn't have that. And I think it would have really helped chill the jets for me. I think Alex is blessed with a higher EQ than I ever had as a CEO. So he may not have needed that as much, but it was a tough thing. And then the final thing is really working with a coach that, and we all come from different backgrounds. So I think that's part of the selection process is, the chemistry, who's going to make the most sense for you. I think some folks choose me because of me having sat in the seat. I've done the job. I've been a CEO. So I also see myself as a mentor coach, that there are best practices or things that you can share. One thing I've had to learn as a coach is to offer them up. And probably 80% of the time, the young search fund CEO is going to either create their own or whatever. But I realize that as a coach, I'm planting seeds. I'm not telling a coach what to do. I'm just planting the seeds. And that's part of my thing, why I love the partnership with Alex. I think a couple of things I think as far as the reasons where I think the struggles are, and this is probably what I would talk to, is I think they both talked about early on. I think you almost feel, and I've heard this from a number of CEOs, I want to make a good impression. And if I hire a coach, what is that saying to the team? That means I'm not really ready for prime time. And I think the way that that's framed, with Alex, he brought me front and center, and I got to meet with the team, and I think it really helped, and I think it was good. With others, it's more of a quiet relationship. They may know they're working with a coach. So that's really up to you on how you present the coach. But I think early on, it actually is a sign of strength and a sign of courage to actually work with a coach rather than a sign of weakness. And that's just a mindset. And again, I totally empathize with that mindset, because I would have had the exact same mindset when I was a young leader. The other thing is, I think part of the coaching thing is there is a discipline to it. So I think sometimes folks have the intention of working with a coach, but it's not really Chris Hendrickson always used to say this, it's not the dollar cost, it's the investment of time and focus. And so, if you're going to work with a coach, I think the thing that Alex did really well, and Hal and I got to work together also, is they committed. They were completely committed to the process, which allowed the process to pay off. Your coach can't do the work for you. They can be there for you, but it really takes your commitment. And I think that's really helpful. Final thing I would say is, I think that what Alex did with me early on, I think really sent a signal, and it really told the team, and it goes back to seek to understand before seeking to understood. It told them that learning is a powerful thing. He was a role model to the team, so much so that when actually Ken, his founder, was having some challenges, he knew that he could reach out to me one-on-one. One of the things that, they call me the high priest sometimes within Kalo or Embark, because there's always a lane of confidentiality. And one thing I respect about Alex is when I was coaching some of his lieutenants, I was in service to lieutenant, and I would hear things. I probably knew some folks that potentially might be leaving, and I kept that secret. That was something that I was in service to them. He knew that I was doing the best that I could do as a coach, but Ken actually took advantage of that. And I think it did help, so much so that when actually Ken left, he hired me as a life coach. And then just recently this year, he's now running a different company and hired me as a coach again. And I think that, that just shows the power of what Alex did. He was a role model. And Ken, I don't think would have probably ever worked with the coach had Alex not done it, but he provided that role model. And he really created this kind of growth mindset with his organization. So as a role model, more than anything, I think it really catapulted. If you look at the growth of Embark and the team, yes, they've acquired some great talent, but I think one of the hidden secrets, or not hidden, it's a very manifest secret, or main thing that Alex did is he developed his team from within. And that's something your coach can also work with you. So that's what I have to do. I'm very grateful to both these guys, by the way. They've been really helpful. And I consider them great friends too. That's always the upside of being a coach. So.
Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for your perspectives. I've got some questions that I'd like to ask to follow up. And for the audience, to the extent that you have questions, you can start putting them into the chat. Going back first, I thought it was interesting that Alex mentioned that he proposed the idea of a coach and that he did so before close. So I wanted to hear any of the panelists' thoughts on the timing, the optimal timing of hiring a coach. Is it before close? Is there a point post-close where it's too late, or can a coach step in anywhere along the timeline? And before you answer, we have another audience member who's also a coach familiar with the search fund space, Angela Nesbitt, and she might have a perspective to offer on this too. So I'm going to open that to all the panelists, that question about timing.
Great. Why don't we let Angela answer that first, and then we can respond.
So, hello.
Yeah, we hear you.
So I do not have much experience with CEOs as they are taking over their company in the search fund arena. I think the principles that Alex described stand. It's just like, why wouldn't you take the help that you need from somebody's experience? My work is to transform leaders. So that's what I'm devoted to, is to help my clients become better leaders.
Got it.
And I would say that Alex was a sort of a leader, even in this respect. He is the first CEO that I worked with that proposed a coach pre-close. I'm totally in favor of that. The earlier the better, especially the whirlwind. I think Dave Dodson wrote a book. I haven't read it, but When the Dog Catches the Car is the name of the book. And it kind of describes what happens. I remember walking into companies. I mean, some of the most vivid memories of my life are not only having children, right? But it's also walking into a company on my first day of ownership. I've done that several times now. And it's just a tremendous rush. And it also is the start of a hard 6 months, right? And so if you have that relationship established ahead of time, I'm not saying that the due diligence period or your search isn't a busy time. It's just if you have that relationship ahead of time, I'm in favor of it as an investor, just saying.
A thing I would offer up and kind of an empirical. So I've worked with 56 searchers at different stages. Probably a third of those work with me at the beginning. And since we're all kind of driving towards EBITDA, et cetera, Parker Davis often would say, I feel guilty because I don't use you that much. And I said, well, you don't use me that much because you used me very early on. So to Hal's sort of point, it's kind of what penny wise, pound foolish sort of thing, that the actual upfront investment is going to save you a lot of costs. I've had the privilege of working with CEOs that maybe are in an inflection point that didn't work with me from the get-go. And that's also can be really helpful. But we often have to do it's a much larger scale because we often have to kind of understand what the issues were, where the sources of conflict came about. And I think to the extent you can work with a coach early on, you may actually prevent or preempt those conflicts from the get-go, and ultimately to save the ultimate cost. Not that that's the main goal, but it's actually, an ends of prevention worth you know what. So that's a kind of my empirical perspective.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry. So I think part of one of Lacey's question is, or can any time work? I think, yeah, you can hire a coach at any time. So if you haven't, and just don't feel bad, any time's is the best time to plant a tree, kind of analogy. And the other thing I'd say is that, but I think that the best time to hire, the right opportune time to hire a coach is right after you've selected your board members. That's the key time, which is because I think that some searchers get a little giddy about this, and then they hire a coach as soon as they start their search, and they get ahead of themselves. You got to buy a company first. You're not a CEO. You got to buy a company first. And so once you form the board, the likelihood of closing that deal is pretty high. So engage your coach at that point, and have your coach involved in that 100-day planning.
So another interesting thing, I think, from this case study is that, again, Alex was the one to propose the idea of a coach. In my experience as an investor, I very rarely have the searcher come and be the one to propose a coach. And I find more often it's the investors who do so. And I'm wondering, about perceived barriers on the entrepreneur side. And as Angela said, why wouldn't you hire one has kind of always been my approach to this. So we've talked a little bit about checking your ego at the door and understanding that the board knows that you haven't been a CEO. But what other barriers can we present to everyone on the call today that they might perceive as barriers but actually aren't? Is it cost? Is it confidentiality issues or concerns? Trust? And again, this is open to everyone. Hal?
Lacey, I'll always wade right in. You throw the fresh meat out there, I'll jump on it.
Jump in.
I'm going to just call it like it is. I think the number one barrier, and I've been on, 20 boards, the number one barrier is CEO ego. Okay. And oh yeah, there's some expense things and there's some time things and so on. But look, it's oftentimes the CEO feels that they need to be strong and need to be effective from day one. And yeah, you do need to be strong and you need to be effective. But it's like Alex or Jeff said, I don't remember, but like Michael Phelps, the best swimmer in history, had a coach. I mean, he was getting ready to swim gold medal world record swims, and his coach was reminding him of stroke technique and flip turn technique. And at the Australian Open, there's a bunch of coaches running around there. Somebody didn't know how to get vaccines taken care of, obviously, but it is not a weakness to have a coach. It's a strength. And that ego barrier, check your ego at the door. You want to be a lifelong learner. You want to have the best guidance you can have. You want to, just like you try to pick the best board you can have, you try to hire the best employees you can have. Okay, get the best confidant, coach, guide that you can get who's going to teach you about, like you may have these fantastic aptitudes, and I'll stop after this. You may have all this smarts, that you've, gone to the best business schools and you've had these experiences in, pre-business school, but that doesn't mean maybe you were a leader, right? You may need leadership coaching. Maybe you were really great at strategy, like where Alex was at the company that he was with, Cambridge, before business school, great strategic and maybe a great culture there. But as far as leadership, he didn't have a big crew of people working for him. So long story short, check your ego, say, hey, I'm going to be a great CEO. And the best path to being a great CEO is hiring a coach. There's my answer to that one. And it may be a little bit challenging to some of us, but hey, look, I throw it out there for you.
I just wanted to add that one of the people often use the sports coach analogy, which is valid. Yes, you see the best world-class athletes, the camera will pan in onto their coach and say, so-and-so is helping this athlete win. One of the differences between athletes and you as CEOs is that athletes get to take several months of the year off to recover. So they train, perform, rest, rinse and repeat. As a CEO, you don't get that privilege. You have to keep working all the time. And a coach is often, in addition to things that everyone else has said, is there to help pace you, to be able to see ahead of you, to bring in perspective that you don't have when you are sitting at your desk.
Jeff, I'm not sure if
Tracy.
you have anything to add. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to touch on the confidentiality piece and maybe debunk any concerns searchers or CEOs might have about how the coach would liaise with the board. But
I can address that because I actually, just a small story. So one of my first clients, the board actually brought me in because this client was having some challenges and we were working closely together. The board was basically a little bit concerned. So they brought me in to give an assessment and I recused myself. I said, that is not my role. I won't play that role. One of the board members got pretty strong and said, well, I'm not sure you're really meant to be a coach in the search fund arena. And I said, well, that may be the case. And I think all coaches would agree with you. I know Angela and I very much agree on this, that we're in service to the CEO, but I think it's a really important discussion to have up front. So that's understood. I think the coach will understand it, CEO, but I think it's also important that board members know. And while we might have different ways that we interact with the board, I just think that making sure that's clear, that the board doesn't have a backdoor channel that the coach is going to talk about you. That's something we talk about front. The other barrier I think is time, and that is a real barrier. So I agree with what Hal said, but I think the time barrier is that there are different levels of coaching. It isn't one speed. It isn't one level of scope. So there are different types of coaching and there are different times and inflection points when you need a coach. So I think what I try to do with clients, and I know Angela does this too, is you create a roadmap of what coaching might look like. So it's not just what you need today, but lay out a landscape and then figure out, hey, when are you going to put the pedal to the metal, or when are you going to lay up and you're just going to be there maybe on a monthly basis, et cetera. So I think you can manage that. You don't have to be overwhelmed.
Well, the way I think about this question is threefold. I think the confidentiality is part of it as well, but I think the three major ones are cost that was mentioned. And I would agree that I don't see this as a cost, I see it as an investment. And as Warren Buffett would say, the best investment you can make is in yourself. The way I think about investing in myself is it's not about me, it's about the team and the company. But if I'm not the best person I can be, then I'm not serving the company well. That's not being a servant leader. So I see it as an investment, not a cost. Second is ego, which Hal alluded to. The spin I'll put on that is my view is that the greater the ego, the greater the insecurity. And that it's actually not confidence or pride that's getting in the way of hiring a coach, but it's insecurity that's getting in the way. And we put up this facade. And the last, which I think is more common than we realize, is awareness. People just don't know how to use the coach. What are they going to do? How do I do it? What do we talk about on the phone? And I am so busy and I have so much going on that I just can't deal with something I don't know how to do. I don't know how to engage with. And that goes back to the cost too, because then you think about bang for buck. But this is one of the reasons I chose Jeff, because I felt that way. I knew theoretically, from an abstract perspective, that I wanted to coach, but I wasn't sure exactly how it would play out. So what I liked about Jeff was Kent, one of my board members, had already used him. So if I needed to get advice from Kent, I could get it, number one. Number two, Jeff had been a consultant, first of all, at BCG, so he could help. Hey, at least if it doesn't work out as a coach, he can at least be a consultant for the business. Third, he had been a CEO. And the fourth was Jeff, as compared to other coaches I had interviewed, was more directive than other coaches. And at this early stage of my career, I felt like I needed somebody to tell me how it is. Hit me right in the middle of the forehead versus a lot of questions. And we would get to the point quicker. And so that helped resolve that awareness issue, which I think is the third barrier to CEOs getting hiring a coach.
Thank you. I'm going to hit pause on my questions for a second and go to Daniel, who raised his hand. Daniel, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, everyone in the panel. It has been a great discussion. My question is, as someone who has never worked with an executive coach before, but really wants to, any best practices on how to choose this coach, one that has like the right fit for you?
Well, thank you, Daniel. That was one of my questions. So I think that could be open to anyone on the panel as well. Maybe Alex, I mean, you covered it a little bit. You talked about him being directive, him having sat in the CEO seat. Are there other factors that weighed into your decision?
Yeah, so I would, no, I think that summarizes it. And that's personal to me. The way I would respond to Daniel's question is, I don't think it matters that much because you get what you put into it. And so the biggest issue I see is that people choose and they don't commit. And so instead of, I wouldn't go off just like when you're looking at for search fund investors, where they say, listen, if the person doesn't know you and has never invested in search funds, they're not going to say yes. So I think the same thing with coaches. It's find the coaches that are recommended by the Search Fund Alliance and just choose one of them, and don't obsess about who you choose, if you get it right or not. But once you choose, go all in and commit, because you'll get out what you put in. And it's not about, hey, the match isn't great, and so I made a mistake, because that's always going to give you an out. You're always going to get an out, and you're going to want to say, oh, it didn't really work out. You have to keep on investing, keep on making it work. And these coaches that are recommended on this list have worked for other people, so they will work for you if you put in the time and effort.
I agree with Alex. I do think that the time of actually exploring and speaking to several coaches, there is a chemistry that is involved. And I think that is just going to be, different people connect with different people. The one thing that I think sometimes you might want to think about, though, is finding somebody that may actually challenge you. I know that's what I did when I hired my coach when I was back being a CEO. And I didn't go with somebody I went with somebody that gave me a slightly different perspective. And that was not always easy, but that helped. So I think it's just really be clear about what your criteria are. I often will provide a couple calls where we'll kick the tires. I have a couple of tools that I like to share with people. So ask your coach to maybe do a realistic preview of what it would look like, so you can get a real sense. I do agree with Alex that once you make the commitment, you can make it work. But I do think there's a chemistry, and I think there is a little bit of due diligence that you can do to make sure it's right. The other thing is, it's not a lifelong commitment. I've been very fortunate, very blessed that Alex and I've worked together. I would say most of my relationships have been that way, but there's some where they haven't, and that's okay. And then you're not like you're tied to this person. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So.
I have another question for the coaches on the call. How do you suggest that search fund teams approach the idea of coaches? Is it that they should each have one? Is it that maybe the person with the internal facing role has one? How do you think about that?
When you're saying search fund teams, I'm not sure exactly what you mean.
A pair, two entrepreneurs.
Great question. So I actually think it's really important to have the same coach. That's my perspective. When I was working with Alex, I also got to work with Chris Hendrickson and Andy Schoonover, who were about year 3 in their deal at VRI, and they were doing very well. But they also realized that early on, you divide and conquer. But as you get to kind of year 3 and 4, you begin to get into each other's circle. And so you have to really work on that alignment and personal accountability towards each other. And so I didn't like the term, but they often called me their marriage counselor, but my favorite terminology. But I think it worked really well to do that. I think if you get, I think having a common language and a common perspective is really important. And I think that when you have multiple coaches, you can kind of get a different perspective, and it can actually make the conflict even worse. That said, though, it does require that confidentiality. So when I work with Chris and Andy, it took a while, but there was, this takes an art in terms of staying in your lane. And then there would be times where I just would say, I can't talk about that. Let's get all three of us in the room together. There's a process I use. It's called a BAM, a building alignment meeting. And I think it's one of the more effective tools of really facilitating a discussion with the coach. And what I do is I actually do a pre-session with the CEO to kind of role play what that conversation is going to look like, and then bring the folks together. I think if you're working with multiple coaches, that wouldn't be feasible. So.
Also going to say the type of coaching skills that are used when it's individually versus a team are slightly different. So Jeff's talked about one kind of team, but then you could have the team that's reporting to you, and having a coach for that team. The coach's focus is on the goals of the team rather than on the goals of the individual. So it's just slightly different skill set, or different skills that are being used.
Great. We have a question in the chat about, compare and contrast a CEO coach versus maybe a mentor versus YPO type group, Vista, and what are the benefits, drawbacks, or areas of overlap as you see them? And maybe I'll start with Alex.
I'm a YPO, have been 6-7 years, and it's different. I see it as different and worthwhile. I recommend that as well, be it Vistage or YPO or any of those, EO, etc. I highly recommend those. Again, it has to do with investing in yourself. And then I'm not sure the difference of a mentor. I feel like I have a lot of mentors in my life, but those tend to be more informal, versus a coach is something you pay for, and that's a business relationship where there's structure. There can be structure, should be structure and a format. And I think that's important. So my advice would be that all of those should exist, and all of those are slightly different. We should have mentors, we should have a leadership executive coach, and we should be engaged in groups like YPO or EO, where we're not just in forum, but we're also going to different seminars or teachings. We're just continuously learning.
I would concur. I'm a big fan. I'm sorry, Angela. I believe that all three are good. And on top of that, Alex, I got to go to a training class on top grading with his chief people officer. So even beyond that, going to where you have a new tool working together on that may be a little bit unkosher for some CEOs, but it even goes beyond just the coaching, the mentor or the groups. They're often just organizations that provide something, whether it's EOS or top grading, et cetera. Those are additional tools. So I think it's just being a lifelong learner and just finding any way that you can learn, and whatever access it is. And I think all the different roles played. It's not an or, it's an and.
I think it also informally, or sort of think of a mentor as somebody that has gone ahead of you and done this particular job, which is very different from a coach. A coach doesn't necessarily have had to be a CEO of a company like yours. So, it's sort of fluid, these differences, but just think about that. You gather your mentors, somebody who has tread the path ahead of you, but they're not going to turn around and invest in you and help you see your blind spots, and help you become inherently a better leader. It might be if it's a leadership mentor that you've chosen.
So to add just a little bit more, there's this concept of working, in the business or on the business, and you're doing some of both of those. What these things are, like a leadership coach or Vistage or YPO, that's working on you as a CEO. Like, I don't know exactly how YPO works, but I did Vistage for many years. And just like meeting Jeff and bringing Jeff on board as mine and my partner's coach, and Jeff even joined our board of directors eventually as a board member. So I was working for Jeff. Okay. And he kicked my ass, by the way. But in the subject of Vistage or YPO, going one day a month, you think about this as a busy CEO, it pained me at first to take that one day a month. In my case, it was the second Tuesday of every month that I did Vistage for about 5 or 6 years. But I got so much out of that, the relationship with other CEOs and knowing what their problems were, the training that took place there. It was my one day a month for really, I'm going to call it a CEO spa day. Okay. It's a CEO spa day. You go and you learn some new concept of leadership or learn about some problem that is, I remember going to a Vistage meeting and learning about the new wage and hour enforcement in California, and coming back and getting my HR manager to do a wage and hour compliance audit. And, we didn't get a lawsuit, and there were lawsuits like crazy with treble damages and et cetera. So anyway, huge advocate for these growth opportunities. Be a lifelong learner. That's what makes life fun, is to continue. I mean, I don't want to have the same experience, 40 years in a row. I want to have 40 new experiences each year. And that's about where I'm counting too.
So we just have time for one last question. I'm gonna ask it. I hope that we've convinced the audience why a CEO coach is a great tool to bring into a company, that investors are supportive of it, and that we're just improving your chances for success. But down to the nitty gritty and the logistics, can we talk a little bit about how this costs and how it's paid for? And if you don't want to get too specific with the numbers, can we just get some sense for how that works?
It's an ad back.
Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, good. That's helpful. It's an ad back. Okay. Well, I can tell you, because I have the data, that it's very reasonably priced, that investors are supportive, and that it is an ad back. And Hal, unless you have anything to add, we will leave it at that.
Out there, I think it's very reasonable for a first-year CEO to spend $10,000 and possibly $20,000 on coaching over the course of the year. It's not a negligible number if you're talking about a company with $1 million in EBITDA, but it's an investment, as Alex said, and the ROI is tremendous. And so, I mean, I want to have a number out there. So I'm saying 10 to 20,000 is very, very reasonable to have, monthly calls and some activities, some training, and that's the order of magnitude. It's not $100,000 a year, and it's not $3,000 a year. It's 10, 20, maybe a little more if you add more training and activities. So there it is, folks.
That's right. And again, the list of coaches will be posted on the SFA website. And all the costs of hiring the coaches that we reference are roughly the same, and they're in the range that Hal has mentioned. I just want to take a quick second to thank you, our panelists, so much. Thanks for taking some time out and being here. I think that was very helpful, and I am convinced, for one, that bringing a CEO coach into search fund acquired companies is the right thing to do. So thanks very much. Great to see you all.
Thanks, Lacey.
Thanks, Val. Thank you.